Where is this Lane Johnson situation? Where does it lie right now? Who knows? What a bizarre story, Phil, as I don't know that I can remember a story that was so wild and all over the map yesterday. I mean, he said, no, I was sleeping, and then he said, yes, he's had his agent come out. I mean, can you remember a story that had so many different layers in one day?
No, it was really strange. You're right about that. I know 2 years ago when he got suspended the first time around, the Daily News reported it. It was Paul Domowitch wrote a story saying that it was going to happen. And it was like a week or so before it actually was announced and it actually happened. The weird thing in all of this is that this whole thing, the idea that, the league's going to test the players and have the ability to suspend them and all that, this is all collectively bargained between the union and the league. And a big part of that collective bargaining process that the union insists on is that there's like real confidentiality and a real sense of trust. You can't report stuff, announce stuff or talk about stuff like this until it's actually, an actual suspension. He's actually going to miss games on the field. So this process goes on, I don't know about every day, but there's always, players testing positive for something or a test goes bad and, they're exonerated when they test the B sample sometimes, or some other explanation clears them. So there are things that, like I said, happen, and you just never hear about it because there's rules that govern that. So whoever leaked this at first, it was leaked yesterday to a radio personality in the Philadelphia area. Who was the person to tweet it out? Whoever leaked that is doing a pretty grave disservice to Lane Johnson, to the Eagles, to the league, to the Players Association. I mean, this is not stuff that should be, lightly thrown out there in the public until it's official and all the appeals and all that have been exhausted. So it's a really strange story. I think it's like we walked into the middle of it, and the resolution hasn't really been figured out yet. So there's still a chance nothing happens here. What it looks like from what Johnson himself told Jay Glazer is that he took an amino acid that he got approved and is approved by the NFL as not a banned substance, and that caused him to test positive for a banned substance. And if that's true, he's got a chance here that the scientists will look at this and say, okay, yeah, that's a possibility, and he didn't cheat. The trouble that Johnson now has, though, is he did get suspended 2 years ago, and if you're a two-time offender, the chances that people are going to believe your explanation this time start to go down a little bit. So it's a very strange situation, and for the Eagles, a high-risk one, because losing Lane Johnson at this point would be a big problem for them.
No doubt, and we'll get into that. But, Phil, you mentioned something that you said there's still a chance that nothing happens here. Now, do you believe that the Eagles themselves were blindsided by this a little bit, and it had a little bit of a factor as to why this was so bizarrely handled and reported on yesterday?
That's a good question. I've gotten the impression that in some ways that the Eagles did not know it was coming. But when you look at the situation, too, Jason Peters is not going to play tomorrow night, and he's hurt again. Same injury that he had trouble with last year, so that's a real reason for concern for them. But Doug Peterson decided to have Matt Tobin play left tackle. Now, the long-term plan when they're replacing Peters for good is to have Lane Johnson move from right tackle to left tackle. So it did raise the question with Pederson, hey, why not just have Lane Johnson get some reps here, get some time at left tackle, get him acclimated to that, because that may be the solution for them long term. And Pederson has said, well, yeah, that would be down the road. We'll see about that. But Matt Tobin's doing a good job in camp, and that all makes some sense, and that's fine. But when this happens, with the story breaking yesterday, all of a sudden you go, well, if Doug Peterson knew there was a chance that Lane Johnson was going to be suspended, he's certainly not going to want him playing, using snaps at left tackle that he may never get to play this season. So it makes a lot more sense for Doug Peterson to be preparing a guy like Matt Tobin to play if he knows that he might not have Lane Johnson. So, we haven't got a chance to talk to Peterson about it. We'll wait until after the game tomorrow night. But it's all kind of in the mix there. There's a lot of confusion about it right now, and who knew what and when they knew it, and exactly what's going to happen next. It's all very vague. But again, this all should be happening behind the scenes, quietly through proper channels, and then when it's decided, if it's decided in Johnson's favor, it would never be announced. We would never know it happened. And if he is suspended, then of course we would find out because you have to announce suspension.
Right. Hence, Phil Sheridan's with us, ESPN.com, NFL Nation. Hence, Phil, is why there's some limbo right now, because as you're chronicling, this would typically be done behind closed doors. No one would even know about it until the B sample was done. And that's why there's no new information, because until that is tested, we have nothing new. So that is why it seems like there's a pause on this, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a process that goes, that happens occasionally when players do get, false positives or different reasons that a positive shows up in a sample and it doesn't show up in the B sample, or it doesn't show up, or it's explained away by something that makes sense and is accepted by the league. So this does happen occasionally, and it shouldn't be leaking out the way it did. Now the reporter who reports it, if you're told on good authority that something like this is happening, you pretty much have to report it. So I'm not knocking the guy for reporting it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is, whoever leaked it to him, again, this kind of runs counter to, it hurts the league, because the league is trying to put this policy in place and keep it in place and have everybody trust it. And every time a player takes a drug test, he's got to trust that the league is going to handle it correctly. If it came from the league side, that's very bad. It's bad for the players because they know they can't trust the league, and now it's bad for the league because they're trying to enforce a policy when the players can't trust them. So that's a real problem on both sides. If it came from Johnson's side or one of the players' side or the team's side, if it came from anyone besides Lane Johnson himself, that's another problem, because if somebody from the Eagles told somebody, that's exactly the wrong way to handle it too. You can't have free agent leaks going on, teams willy-nilly giving up confidential information about league policy. I mean, it's really a bad thing in that regard. So the fact that it seems like it's going oddly, or it seems strange to us from the outside now, is that we're walking into the middle of a process that should be done confidentially, and there's a system in place and a way to do things. And if they're going about that business, not supposed to be going about it with us all waiting for the outcome.
Right.
The B sample should be done, behind closed doors, not with the media waiting for a puff of white smoke to come up. So it's a little weird. The whole situation's a little bit weird. I feel bad for Lane, because he's a really good guy, and he ran into a situation 2 years ago. He made a mistake. It was a medication he was prescribed that he didn't realize was a banned substance, and that's a mistake that happened. He paid for it, and but that again, have to happen again. People will start to wonder about you. And
Phil, can I ask you this then? Do you think it's not fair to say then that Lane Johnson can't be trusted if he got nailed once and now his name's involved again, and even if he gets off, is it fair to ask that question? Because people are going, I mean, they want him cut, they want him done. I mean, the reaction is just crazy. Is it fair to say that Lane Johnson can't be trusted even if he doesn't get suspended just for having his name involved in something like this again?
Well, that's up to every person's got to make that decision about themselves. I mean, trust is a personal thing. I think, the Eagles, gave him a big new contract, but now it's been reported that, the guaranteed money in it all gets voided out if he has another suspension. So the Eagles, were willing to trust him far enough to give him a very generous contract, but they protected themselves. They weren't willing to trust him enough to just hand them money without any, possible way to pull it back if they ran into a situation like this. So they protected themselves a little bit here. If he's not suspended and everything goes forward as normal, I mean, I don't see how you would justify cutting, especially if you're a team that desperately is going to need at least one really reliable tackle over the next couple of years. A guy you've invested a lot of money in already. From that perspective, this was a thing like it was steroids and something really obviously cheating. You might be a little bit more prone to say, hey, if the guy's doing this and it's the only reason that he's able to play at the level he does, that would make it, raise a whole bunch of different issues. Sure, if a guy needed steroids to play the way he does, and he keeps getting caught using them, and he has to stop using them, he may never be the same player again. Well, then I could see, say, you can't trust him, and he might not be the player he was. Maybe cutting him is the best way to go. But with this guy, and the way the circumstances of this sound, it's all very complicated and confused. And again, he's been a very decent guy to be around. He's a really good locker room guy. Other players like him. And he's been a really good player. I would give him the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise.
All right, Phil Sheridan's with us, ESPN.com. NFL Nation covers the Eagles. So if he is not here for 10 games, how do the Eagles move forward? What are some of their options across this line, which I guess you could say with Peters, Barbary, Kelsey, Brooks, and Johnson is a strength of the team. And now with a injured Peters, a situation at right tackle, all of a sudden you start to get concerned again.
Yeah, I mean, the Peters thing really complicates this a lot because the Eagles went into the season knowing, we have Jason Peters, we're bringing Jason Peters back, but we know he's 34 and we know he's been hurt quite a bit lately, and, we know we may have to replace him. And Jonathan was a backup position there. It was, if Jason Peters got hurt in a way that he couldn't play the rest of the season, it happened in September, Lane Johnson was going to be the left tackle. And then you would have to fill in at right tackle, and you have a few guys that could do that. But if Jason Peters can't play and Lane Johnson's suspended, now you don't have either tackle. And they don't have a plan in place to replace both tackles. I mean, I don't think that'd be possible in the NFL with the salary cap and the scarcity of talent at that position. They do have a bunch of guys that have been around for a few years now, in fact. Some of them you're kind of surprised about. Like, I was thinking about Dennis Kelly. Injury, drafted him in 2012. He ended up starting, I think, 10 or 12 games that year at right tackle. Peters got hurt, and they moved Todd Harriman to left tackle, and Dennis Kelly basically played right tackle all year. So he has some experience over there. Of course, that was a 4-12 team that got injuries fired. So I'm not sure he had the best season or was part of the best offense of all time. But you just have a guy that has played the position and didn't embarrass himself, was solid out there. He's still around. He survived the whole Chip Kelly era, which is kind of surprising. An Andy Reid guy that didn't play very much and still survived all through that time. So you have a guy like Dennis Kelly. He could do it. Andrew Gardner can play tackle. He's coming off an injury from last year and started at guard last year. But he's a guy that could do it. He's got the size and the versatility to kind of do it. He's a smart guy. And I think he's a guy that could possibly plug in. Alan Barber, who you mentioned a few minutes ago, he played more tackle until he got to Philadelphia in his career. He started, I think, 9 games for the Packers one year. Maybe it was 7 games for the Packers in 2009 at right tackle. So he's got some experience as well. You can move Barber out to right tackle and replace him at left guard with Stefan Wisniewski or Isaac Sayamalo, the rookie. One of those guys can play the left guard. The position is not exposed as much as a tackle would be. So you have Barber, you have Kelly, Matt Tobin, who is going to start in place of Jason Peters tomorrow night. Obviously, if you can play left tackle in place of Jason Peters, you could plug him in at right tackle. Which all we're going to really have, though, is if Peters continues to have problems and you got to replace Johnson because he's suspended, and now you got to replace Peters as well. You have at least one of those building blocks in place. And you have only 2 of these guys. One of these guys you can get by with. I think having 2 of them at both ends on the offensive line, both sides of the quarterback, the blind side and the right side, both manned by guys without a lot of experience, not guys out that caliber. Then I think you have real problems, and that's what they're looking at if Johnson is suspended.
They've got, and I think the last one, Barber moving out to right and Wisniewski and Sayamala battling for left might be the best option, just my opinion. I wonder if, how does Doug Pederson handle this? I mean, does Johnson, I know he didn't speak today, and this didn't happen when he spoke yesterday, so I guess I'll kind of get an opinion from you here. Do we see Lane Johnson tomorrow night? Does he play? I mean, does he run with the ones and acting as if he'll be there for the long? I mean, it's an interesting spot for Pederson, how to give how much playing time, or do you just start rolling somebody else out there and get them first-team reps tomorrow night?
No, it's a great question, and part of the determination there is, I'm speculating because of what he's doing that it looks like Pederson had the heads up that this was looming, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he just found out yesterday with the rest of it. And if that's the case, this is all, just kind of, basically an emergency situation, and who knows what he's going to do. I do know that 2 years ago, when Johnson's suspension was announced, that Chip Kelly basically, had Johnson running with the second team all through camp, and during the preseason, he got him work, but Johnson was going to miss the first 4 games. And it wasn't like the preseason was going to get him ready for when he got to play again in October. So he had Johnson on the second team and had other guys playing in front of him who were going to play anyway when the season started. So that is how Kelly handled it 2 years ago. At this point, if Pederson had this in mind and he's trying to put up a front here to protect Johnson in case he doesn't get suspended, that's the thing now. You don't even know if he's going to be suspended. So you probably want him to go ahead and play, get his reps. He's never worked with Brooks, at that right guard. They got to learn to play together side by side. So it probably makes sense to just go ahead and let Johnson play. They practice together all week, and let them work together. And maybe by next week you'll have more clarity on what's going on here, and at that point you can make a more learned and reasonable determination about what you should do. But it's a mess of a situation, and the longer Jason Peters' injury lingers, the more thorny the Johnson side of the line will be too. So it's all connected, and it's all pretty complicated.
Yeah, you wonder if, the last time this happened, I mean, typically they get tested in April. They knew prior that he was going to miss those 4 games, so you can, maybe even go into the draft differently and your offseason differently, knowing, hey, we're going to lose this guy for 10 games. If he was to be suspended 10 games, we know he loses a lot of money, Phil. Any shot the Eagles would consider just cutting ties and saying, can't trust this guy next time he's out 2 years, but they just move on, or do you think that's not really a possibility?
I think it's a possibility, but I don't think it's very likely. Like I said, he's a guy that you took in the first round a couple of years ago. You've given him another big new contract, so you knew that he tested positive once, and you still gave him a contract that's worth close to $60 million overall, $35 million of it guaranteed. If he is suspended, then the guarantees come off of the money that is guaranteed him for the future. So he would be able to release him at any point without having to pay him guaranteed money. So he gives you that freedom. I would say that if I was the Eagles and I'm looking at this, like I said, he's been a good player. He's been a good guy in every other way. This whatever happened here, if it was some kind of a mistake or misunderstanding, again, having that happen twice is it's proof enough that the guy's got something going wrong in his the way he's handling his business. But if you're the Eagles at this point, and giving you other options, it might make sense to me to just keep playing Johnson. If it happens again and it's going to be 2 years, then of course all bets are off, and you probably would release him because hanging on to a guy and keeping him on the roster while he waits around for 2 years is not going to do anybody any good. So at that point, you'll probably move on from him. But I wouldn't see any reason to do it now. Again, if you had a couple of tackles that could really play, and one to replace Peters and one to replace Johnson, then sure, bring a young guy in and let him go. But the way it is right now with the guys that are on hand at the Eagles, to me it would be a mistake. Unless there's something about him that we don't know that makes them think that they know they can't trust him. That would change things. But from what we all know publicly and looking at the situation from here, I would think it would be a mistake to cut him now.
Phil, there is a game tomorrow night, and looking at some of the things there, Peters, Jenkins, 10 others, among 10 guys, I should say, that will not play. You've been doing this a long time. What do we look for in Game 1 of the preseason?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Just watching Sam Bradford run the offense, I think it will be interesting to seeing if with the guys that are on the field, there's enough talent out there for Sam Bradford to run an offense successfully in the NFL. We get a little bit of a feel for that for the first time. So I think it's unusual in that we're kind of we had this happen with Chip Kelly a couple of years ago. It was kind of a new thing, calling the plays from the sideline and the hurry up offense and all that stuff. So there was a little bit of that a couple of years ago. This time with Pederson, it's more like a return to the normal standard NFL way of doing things. But with Pederson, there's the Andy Reid connection, and even as recently as Kansas City's last game of the year last year in the playoffs when they lost, there were questions about the way they were running their offense, whether they were getting the plays in fast enough, they should have been hurrying more, what they were doing and why. So I think fans are going to watch this game too, and watching the sideline to see how is Doug Pederson handling. He's going to call the plays. He's going to be calling plays in. He's going to be in charge of getting players in and out, making sure there's enough time on the play clock when the play's called. Making sure the right guys are on the field for the right play. And it's stuff that he's done as an offensive coordinator, but he's running the whole show here. So if they're calling timeouts just because the wrong personnel group in, or it's the wrong play call in, or change something, that's going to be something that I think the Eagles fans will remember that going forward. If Pederson has a bad showing in his first game, so I think a smooth operation where they go out there and they do things kind of the right way and keep things running smoothly. That would go a long way to kind of calming some of the possible fears that come with hiring an Andy Reid guy to be your head coach. But just the way the offense runs, what it looks like, whether they're able to get guys out in space and get them the ball. And that's what the offense is designed to do.
Right.
But whether they can do it with Pederson designing the plays and Bradford running them, that would be the main thing to watch. And that, and of course, seeing Jim Schwartz's defense, it'd probably be pretty vanilla for a first preseason game, but at least getting a feel for what that defense is going to look like will kind of be fun too.
Was a report out there that looking maybe for some inside linebacker head. Tulloch's name was mentioned late last week or early this week, and then there was another report that they looked for possibly inside linebacker. Is the linebacker depth maybe the biggest concern on this team? Even though there's 3 starters seem to be okay, is the depth at that position something they're looking to upgrade?
I would say they have to be. I mean, no one's actually, saying flat out, hey, yeah, we're looking for linebackers, at least to me. But, yeah, they have pretty solid 3 starters at this point. But, Jordan Hicks was hurt last year. Michael Kendricks was hurt last year. Nigel Bradham has been hurt when he was in Buffalo. So you have 3 guys, but it's a position with a lot of injuries and guys that have been injured. It seems like not having more kind of accomplished backups that you can rely on would be a little bit of malpractice, if you're not at least trying to upgrade that. And they may like the young guys that they have and want to see what they can do. And, the first preseason game or 2 is a chance to do that. Get your young guys in, kind of get a sense of what exactly you have there. And then once you've assessed them, you can kind of say, all right, yeah, these guys might be good down the line, but we really need to get somebody in here who can play right away. That's why I thought that the Stephen Tulloch thing made a lot of sense. He played for Jim Schwartz in Detroit and in Tennessee. He knows him. He knows the defense. He's not a young guy anymore. He's a guy that, it's a little bit like playing the D'Amico Ryans kind of figure. But, this timing makes sense to me because, you had a couple weeks of camp now. You've got a pretty good handle on the guys that you have, the young guys, what they can do, what they can't do, what they might need to work on. So bringing in a veteran now, start taking up practice reps and be the guy that's getting ready to be, either a backup or starter makes a lot of sense. Whoever it is, whether it's Tulloch or they can make a trade or they just scan the waiver wire later in the month as rosters start to get cut. One way or another, I think I would be very surprised if the Eagles start with, without adding a linebacker somewhere in here before the season starts.
In your mind, biggest competition over the next 4 games here? What are you watching that has the most intrigue starting tomorrow night?
I think the cornerbacks. It's been a really strange situation. I think going into it, a lot of us, and certainly I did, thought Eric Rowe was a guy that played well enough last year, second-round pick last year. He's still a young guy. Had a chance to be a real player. And, he has not been, high on the list in terms of depth chart since Jim Schwartz got here. I have not been real thrilled with him, his performance. So he's kind of dropped a little bit. But, Leotis McKelvin and Ron Brooks came from Buffalo. They've been running with the first team at cornerback because they know Schwartz's defense and what he wants from his corners. Nolan Carroll's a guy that was a starter here last year, coming off an injury. He's going to be in the mix. Jalen Mills, the 7th-round pick, is a guy that, a lot of people had him, draft experts had him, as a 2nd or 3rd-round pick, but he had some off-the-field issues that dropped him all the way to the 7th round. But he has looked throughout camp like a 2nd or 3rd-round pick. He looks like a guy that's ready to play in the NFL. So, all that group of guys that I just named, they're all guys that have been here and, been around, and they've been rotating a lot during camp. But how they actually play on the field, facing another offense, kind of left out there when the defense is putting on pressure and the front 7 is all about getting to the quarterback. Can you kind of hold down your position, keep your guy covered long enough for them to get there? Seeing these guys actually play cornerback against another team will be really telling and have a lot to do with who makes the team. I think that because it's hard to look at the left guard competition, live and go, oh, Alan Barber really played better than Isaac Seumalo, in that game. But when you're watching cornerbacks, you can kind of tell if they're getting burned, if they're making plays. You can kind of see the difference a little bit. So cornerback, to me, and of course, what Carson Wentz looks like is going to, have a lot to do with how people react to this team. If he comes out and doesn't look that good or looks a little bit nervous or not quite ready to run the offense, that's going to tamp down some excitement about the team because he's such an important part of what they're doing. If he comes out and looks like he's really ahead of the game, and we've seen that with backup quarterbacks in the past. I remember Bobby Hoying and A.J. Feely coming out in the second half of preseason games when they were young players, and they're playing against a 13 defense on the other side, and they look really sharp and good. So Carson Wentz has a chance to really shine and get people kind of buzzing about him. So there's a lot to watch. For a typical preseason game, I think there's more here than there usually is. So we've got the plus for all of us who have to go watch it for a living.
And you can listen to it tomorrow night, 97.3 ESPN. Coverage starts at 6. Phil Sheridan is at Sheridan Scribe on Twitter, ESPN.com. NFL Nation has more on the Eagles as they get ready for the Bucs. Thank you, Phil. Always a pleasure. We'll talk to you next week, pal.
All right, Mike. Take care.